Hello guys. If you see my video, I guess you're interested in cloud technologies, Azure platform, and authentication. I usually choose topics for my videos based on my professional experience, as I'm a software developer, and now I'm quite focused on development of integration solutions with use of Azure services. Sometimes it's quite challenging and inspiring. The title to this video says that the video is about authentication. And recently I noticed that authentication is quite an interesting aspect of development of integration solutions in Azure. As it's always required, you cannot have any solution without authentication. Every service you're gonna connect to will require authentication. And the authentication has to be secure, robust, and it should be easy to manage in the enterprise solution, in the large-scale solutions. So the thing which is not so critical in a small solution may become a huge headache in the enterprise scale solution. And for today's video, for today's example, I'm going to use Logic App, SharePoint, and Managed Identity. It's quite an interesting scenario for those who are new to managed identities. I will give a brief description. Managed identity in Azure is a secure and convenient way to handle authentication with your applications and services. It eliminates the need to manage credentials manually and enhances the security posture of your solutions. The most convenient thing about it is that Managed Identity provides an identity for your application that is automatically managed by Azure, which offers seamless integration with various Azure services. So from your Logic App or Azure function having a managed identity, you can easily set up access to different services in Azure. And it works pretty simple. It's easy to set up. And that's why I'm not going to use this in my today's example. I've chosen SharePoint because setup of access to SharePoint with use of managed identity, it's not so easy. I would say you will have to use a PowerShell script, but it gives a very good result. And even though you will create a managed identity for your Logic App, it's not enough to give access to SharePoint. You will need to use Microsoft Graph to access the SharePoint and to set up access, to set up authentication in SharePoint, to give permission to use the SharePoint resources. Those who are going to use Microsoft Graph for the first time should know that it's an API in Azure which provides a unified programmability model for seeing Microsoft 365 services, and it provides a single endpoint to access multitude of Microsoft 365 data and services. It gives to a rich set of data in Microsoft 365 and Azure, including users, groups, calendars, emails, SharePoint data, Active Directory, and so on and so forth. And the API is a RESTful API. It's quite easy in use and easy to understand how to work with. It leverages Azure AD for authentication and ensures secure access to Microsoft 365 resources. So let's get started. And first of all, I will explain you what kind of a solution we will implement now and how this authentication and authorization will work. We have a Logic App and we have a SharePoint site with use of standard Logic App actions for SharePoint. We would use the connection where the connection is authenticated for a user registered in the Active Directory, and this user has access to SharePoint resources for a SharePoint site. This can be a service user, but anyway, it's a user registered in Azure AD, Active Directory, and it has username and password, and we have to manually type in these credentials in the dialog box when we create this connection in the Logic app. In this solution, we would use the managed identity, which is created in Active Directory. And this managed identity is represented by an enterprise application registered in AD with a use of Microsoft Graph and a PowerShell script. We will give this managed identity a role sites selected and access right to a particular SharePoint site. What is beneficial in this kind of granting authentication is that we use the role sites selected. Instead of giving access to the entire SharePoint with all its sites, we will specify a particular site, and only to this site the managed identity will get access to. Then instead of a standard SharePoint action, we will use an HTTP action which will call Microsoft Graph, and Microsoft Graph will forward request to SharePoint, and the SharePoint will return data to Logic app. So let's go to Azure, and I will show you step by step how to set up this type of authentication. I have a Logic app, and first of all, we will go to Identity, where I will enable System Assigned Managed Identity. Switch on the status and save. As you see in the warning, it says that for this Logic app, we will get registered the System Managed Identity in the Microsoft Entra ID. You already know that Microsoft has changed name for Microsoft Azure Active to Microsoft Entra ID. So once it's registered, this application, in this case it's an application with the name of the Logic app, can be granted permission to access resources protected by Microsoft Entra ID. So I click yes. The dialog says that enabling system managed identity is finished. We get the principal ID here. This is the object ID of the managed identity created in Microsoft Entra. So I copy the object ID and switch over to the Microsoft Entra. And in the enterprise applications, I will just paste this ID. So the list shows the managed identity created for my Logic app. We can click on its title and go to the details of the application. I want to draw your attention, first of all, to permissions. The permissions page does not show any permissions available created for this application. We will change this in a minute. The next step will be the PowerShell, but I just copy the object ID again, and then we switch over to the PowerShell. So I have some code prepared already, and first of all I will paste the object ID here. This is the variable which will accept the value of the managed ID that was just created. In order to use the PowerShell script against the Microsoft Graph, we have to install the Microsoft Graph SharePoint module first of all, and then I have it done already, and then they import this module. I'll do it. Importing Microsoft Graph module is pretty time-consuming operation. It's a huge module, but after we have it imported, I will initialize these variables. So as I said, the object ID gets the ID of the managed identity application registered in Microsoft Entra. I define the graph scope variable, which gets the value of sites selected. So the Microsoft Graph will grant the sites selected scope to the application for accessing SharePoint. And the tenant ID is the tenant ID of Azure tenant. So I run it. And then I connect to Microsoft Graph. In this step, usually in first time, you get a dialog where you have to confirm connection to the Microsoft Graph. But since I did it already, I don't get any authentication window. And the next step is to get the Microsoft Graph Service Principal, where this is the idea of the Microsoft Graph service in Azure. You can find this in the article Verify First-Party Microsoft Applications in sign-in reports. And if I search for this ID in this list of services, this ID is given to Microsoft Graph service, along with many other services which you can use for your connections. This is the list of application IDs of commonly used Microsoft applications. Quite useful. Okay, but now let's switch back to the PowerShell script. I run this command and it's executed. So the Microsoft Graph variable is assigned with the service principal. The next command uses the variable graph scope, which is site selected. Here we have to get the role. So this command will give us all the roles provided by Microsoft Graph, but we are interested only in the site selected. So we use the filter. And if we check this variable, we see that it has got the value. And then I construct the variable consisting of 3 attributes: principal ID, which gets the managed identity object ID, resource ID, which gets the Microsoft Graph Service Principal ID, and then the app role. The app role is the one we have got with the last command. So we can check the ID. We have the ID value here. So I create this variable and run the command new mg. Mg is Microsoft Graph Service Principal app role assignment. It's not case sensitive, but anyway, it's better to use the same spelling. So this command accepts a service principal ID for our application, our service principal of the logic app, and then they constructed a composed variable having 3 attributes. And then I just use format list because this command will return result, which I want to see. Okay, here they are. So I just can copy this. And this is the successful result of the execution of this command, which assigns the sites selected scope to the logic app service principal, which we can verify if we go back to Azure portal and on the page permissions for our managed identity. If I click refresh, we'll find Microsoft Graph, sites selected, access selected site collections. This is what we wanted to get. Microsoft Graph gives permission to selected site collections. I did not define yet which sites collections the service principal will get access to, and this will be the next step in the PowerShell script. So what I'm going to do, I go to the script. I have the script prepared, so I paste it in here. And let's go through the script. The first variable, SPO, SharePoint Online tenant, is the name of the SharePoint tenant, which I will use to get data from. I have created a site in SharePoint with a list, and the list has 3 elements, which I will read with my Logic app. So the SharePoint tenant is this one. And then the site name, retail, and then the list name, test list. We will use these parts in the script. So let's switch over to the script. Tenant, the SharePoint Online site name. Then this variable is a composition of both variables into one specific format string, where the tenant name is followed by colon, then sites, and then the site name followed by colon. So we've got this variable prepared. And here I have some error regarding the PowerShell syntax, which I have to fix. So I have to place both variables into parentheses, prefixed with $, and the same here. It's just a specific syntax of PowerShell. So I run assignment of these variables, and let's check. Yes, this is the correct value. Import module Microsoft Graph Sites, and the module is imported now. I can't remove this connection. Connect Microsoft Graph. It's important to use this. Scope, sites, full control, all. It's executed. Then the application variable. The ID must get the enterprise application, which we will get from the Azure portal. Let's go back to the Microsoft Enterprise application, our managed identity, and if we switch over to overview, application ID is this parameter. So I copy this, I go back to the script and paste it in here, and the name is correct. This is the name of the application and the name of our Logic app. So I assign this, but here it's a name of the application, of course. Application role. I assign the role right. This gives possibility to both read and write data. If you need only read access, then use read role. So then I use the command new mg site permission. So when I have this command executed, the permission is given. And note this comment which I have given here. You, who is connected to the Microsoft Graph, must have the permissions in the SharePoint, which give you possibility to assign permission to the application, to the site. So basically, your permission should be not lower than owner of the site, or you can of the entire site collection. So if this command fails, most probably you don't have enough permissions to grant permission to another identity to this site. So be careful about this. Now the work with PowerShell script is finished, and I switch over to Azure portal and to my Logic app. And in the Logic app blade, we will go to the designer. I have already HTTP trigger created. And the next step is to use the HTTP action. But before I go to the HTTP action, I want to show you how the standard connection to SharePoint in the Logic app works. So I type the SharePoint in the search string, and I take the SharePoint group of actions. And if I want to read SharePoint list items, I have to choose the action named Get Items. And then after selecting the SharePoint action, you will be prompted to sign into SharePoint. So I will have to click on sign in, and in the interactive dialog you will have to use your personal user or your service user account to get connected to the SharePoint. So then, after having the connection created, you'll be able to select the SharePoint tenant, SharePoint site, and then the list, and so on and so forth, and then you'll be able to fetch data. So you can see that here the connection is created. But as I said in the beginning, I will use the regular HTTP action instead of the SharePoint action because it does not support the managed identity authentication. So I delete this one, and I will add the HTTP action, and here I choose the method get, and then the URL will be to the Microsoft Graph API, and here we can recognize the SharePoint tenant name, which we have already used, followed by the colon sign, then sites, site name with a colon, then lists, the list name. We want to get items of the list, and then with this I define which fields of the list will be fetched. Next is authentication, and I will use the managed identity. So this HTTP action will use the managed identity assigned to the logic app, created for the logic app. It's a system assigned managed identity, and as an audience we have to specify Microsoft Graph, and I can also add the response, which will be used to return the body of the response of HTTP action. So our logic app is ready, and I can call it manually. And it returned us the result. I'll switch to another window to show you better what was returned. We've got a request, and then the HTTP action has been executed with the URL to Microsoft Graph, not to SharePoint, but to Microsoft Graph with attributes of the SharePoint site. And as authentication, it only implies that we use the managed service identity and the audience pointing to the Microsoft Graph. That's it. And then we get the result, 3 items. Those 3 items of the list. Here in the title we'll see item 1, item 2, item 3. Let's do the list. Item 1, item 2, item 3. This is what we wanted to get. Great. And I want to show you one more thing, which will confirm that this managed identity only gets access to the specified site. The site is named retail, and I will add another HTTP action. It will be also get, just the same as the previous one, but I will use another site. The site MSFT also has a list named test list. So instead of retail, I will use MSFT list Name does not have a space, so it's one word. The rest is the same, so we will define the authentication using managed identity. Audience, it's just copied, and it's Microsoft Graph. I save this. My expectation is that this action will be executed, and the second request to SharePoint will fail with the reason of unauthenticated request. So let's do it. I can just rerun the previous request. Running. Failed. Let's go to the details. And as I said, the first one executed as in our first test, returning the same results. And the second one failed with error. Now this error says something different, and it's about error in the site name, which is MSF instead of MSFT. Let's quickly fix it. T. Saving changes. And I resubmit the request. Failed. Yes. This time the status code 403, which means access denied. We get access denied here. And this is just brilliant. Exactly what I wanted to have. So, as a bottom line to my video today and to my demonstration, the Logic app has got access to SharePoint with use of managed identity, with use of Microsoft Graph. And since the standard SharePoint actions don't support a managed identity, we use the HTTP action, HTTP request through the Microsoft Graph to SharePoint. And we're able to set up access so that our managed identity has access to the particular site collection and not to the entire SharePoint tenant. This approach is very important for enterprise price scale solutions. Granularly set up access to the resources, and you cannot use personal accounts, Azure AD accounts in your access setup. I'm glad that you are with me until the end of the video. I hope that it was helpful and you've got to know something new and useful. Please subscribe to my channel, like the video if it was interesting, and see you next time. I will come soon with the next topic, helping you in development of your software solutions. Thank you. Goodbye.